So there are several different ways where physical disabilities might impact children as they're developing. So some of these impact learning, although not all children with cerebral palsy have intellectual disabilities, some do. Even among children who have no intellectual disabilities or differences in their ability to understand or master abstract or complex ideas, we do know that children with cerebral palsy are more likely to struggle with visual spatial skills. So sometimes a limitation in mobility means that children have less experiences using hands to manipulate items or objects. They've had less opportunity to move themselves around in the world, and then that does impact visual spatial skills, which can also impact mathematic ability among some children. We also know that the impact of feeling different among children who use mobility devices or who walk or talk differently can particularly impact children during adolescence. And there have been a couple studies really looking at interviewing individuals, especially teens with physical disabilities, about their experiences. So this is some of these quotes are from one study where teens talked about feeling um, more accepted and less disabled when they were younger compared to when they got older. So one person said, when I was younger, I wasn't really aware that I had a disability. Well, I was, but it didn't hit me until I was about 13 or 14, and I realized, wait, I can't do that. So that's consistent with the development of identity around the age of 13 and 14, and how young adolescents are starting to really look at themselves in different ways and become very self-aware. Another person said, when I was young, I didn't view myself as disabled. When I thought of myself, then I thought I looked like everyone else. And then finally, individuals with physical disabilities might have less autonomy compared to typical peers, which of course also impacts their development. And this is just another example of a quote from a teenager. It says, in secondary, which is like high school, someone was always there and they wouldn't go, and I would think, just go do your own job with someone who needs you. It was annoying because I couldn't even have a private conversation. So we know that when somebody has a physical disability, they sometimes feel like they get too much help from additional adults, especially in a school setting, and then have less opportunity to kind of experiment or struggle on their own. In addition to those developmental impacts of physical disabilities, there can also be a variety of social or environmental barriers. So these are examples of when there is some type of mismatch between the individual and the environments where they're participating. So one of the greatest barriers for people with physical disabilities has to do with the physical accessibility of environments. So you can see in the picture there's a woman who is at the base of stairs, and because she's a person who uses a wheelchair, she can't access whatever's on the top of those stairs. So that's a really obvious, commonly used example of accessibility. But accessibility can also relate to classroom or school environment that is cluttered or has too many desks within a space so that somebody can't fully access the environment. It might relate to doorways with things kind of blocking part of the doorway, where most people who can walk can easily move in and out of the doorway, but somebody who uses a wheelchair that's wider is not able to get through. Or it might even be that a desk in a classroom setting is designed for children sitting in chairs and is not tall enough for a wheelchair to roll under it. Another environmental barrier or social barrier has to do with attitudes. so the way that people with physical disabilities are viewed in a culture. And there is significant variability across different cultures. We do know that people with physical disabilities, although very capable, and we saw some examples of people in those videos speaking for themselves and being great advocates, having jobs and careers just like everybody else. But sometimes people with physical disabilities are not really given the benefit of high expectations throughout their education, or as adults are experience attitudes limiting their ability to work. In terms of hiring, people think that they might be an additional risk or liability, and so they tend to be underemployed and are a group of people with a high unemployment rate. Individuals with physical disabilities might have difficulty with healthcare systems, particularly children. Parents of children with physical disabilities describe one of the greatest barriers to living a full life with their children is that they spend significant amounts of time navigating the healthcare system to get their children the support that they need. They are more at risk for health-related issues, and so there might be a great deal of medical appointments. There might be difficulties in insurance coverage or getting to see the specialists that somebody needs to see because it may or may not be covered by their insurance. For young children who are on the state's healthcare system, Medi-Cal, there are often even more barriers to accessing services and supports through the healthcare system, and parents describe long waits to see specialists, or again, a lack of coverage for certain types of services that they need for their children. Availability of supports. So that might mean that they have a hard time finding individuals to provide the support they need in a school setting. Some individuals need nursing care at home, and parents describe finding a nurse who's qualified to meet the needs of their child, or who will meet the scheduling needs for their family can be a significant barrier and can really limit the ability of families to have a kind of typical family life. Families of children with low socioeconomic status often really struggle to get the most current technology or the equipment that they feel really will best meet their children's needs. So because of that access gap, many families of individuals with disabilities end up paying for services and supports and health care out of pocket instead of being paid by insurance when they can, which really can have a significant economic impact on their family.
Okay, let's look at some strategies and interventions for physical disabilities. First of all, early intervention. So, technically, early intervention is focused on infants and toddlers 0 to 3 years old. So, many physical disabilities are diagnosed pretty early when children are not meeting those developmental milestones of rolling over, sitting up, and taking first steps at a young age. And early intervention in those early formative years can really help families and children understand how to help children to use their mobility or stand or sit up to the best of their ability. And so part of early intervention services is also helping families to learn how to support their child and to learn how to navigate the different systems related to insurance, healthcare, and services that their child might benefit from. So there are a wide range of therapies that children might benefit from when they have a physical disability. The most common for children with physical disabilities is that they would receive some type of physical therapy, but they might also be receiving therapies related to communication skills. for augmentative and alternative communication or developing speech, or they might receive occupational therapy, which can help with the development of fine motor skills. Now, while many of these therapies can be provided in separate settings, one-to-one or in small groups with a specialist, really best practice is that these therapies be embedded within a variety of typical activities. So while children are playing, engaging in eating or self-care activities at home, or within a typical preschool classroom when young children are singing songs, we're really working on language, movement, and self-help skills at the same time. As children get a little bit older and they're in elementary, middle, or high school, we can continue to embed the various types of activities that they need to practice, like sitting up, moving, communicating, doing things for themselves within all of these activities that they're participating in throughout the school day. That way they're learning how to use the skills they need in the context of the activities where they need to use them. Because sometimes children with physical disabilities can be at risk for developing learned helplessness, or because adults may become accustomed to doing things for them. It's important that in any of the services or supports we're providing to students, that we're embedding opportunities for self-determination. And that really means that we're allowing the children to have choice and control over activities they're engaging in, how they're engaging in those activities, and the types of support that we provide to them. So that if something is difficult for a child, they might choose that they want to try it themselves or struggle through, or they might be tired and want the help, and they need to learn how to make those types of choices for themselves. We might provide a variety of curricular or environmental accommodations or modifications. So depending on the individual learning needs of the student, they may need some activities shortened or adjusted so that they can physically access the activity, or if the child has a developmental disability or intellectual disability along with their physical disability, they might need some expectations change related to the academic skills that they are learning in a classroom. Assistive technology refers to the wide variety of tools and technology that somebody might use to access the curriculum. Other important needs of these students are specialized healthcare. Some students have healthcare needs related to seizure disorder that might be associated with their physical disability. In the video about spina bifida, there was an example of a young man who used a catheter to urinate at school. Some students also use feeding tubes because of the musculature of the digestive system. They might not be able to eat and swallow the same as typical children, and so a feeding tube connects directly to a tube that comes from the stomach and allows children to kind of bypass the need to use their mouths to eat and swallow and chew. And students can absolutely use things like feeding tubes in a classroom setting. And then finally, I've referred a few times to the variety of specialized equipment that children might benefit from. So that includes anything from wheelchairs and walkers to something like a gait trainer, which is what this little girl is in here, which can really provide a lot of physical support to children who can get exercise and move while this device can help them to support their posture. They don't have to worry about balance or stability. They just have to work on propelling themselves forward using this tool. Okay, here are some more examples of assistive technology. So here from very low tech, and you can see some pencil grips, some special scissors, These are just a variety of different, really simple tools that children can use if they can't physically hold on to a pencil the same as typical kids. There's a variety of devices. So, for example, instead of a typical mouse where you have to really be able to isolate a finger to access a computer or use a trackpad, these are called switches or joysticks, so that somebody could really just tap or hit a switch with their whole hand, or use their whole hand to manipulate a joystick, which can help them to control a lot more. This is an example of a high-tech tool that is for environmental control, so being able to control other things through usually Wi-Fi or Bluetooth within the environment, like the TV, the lights in the room, music, anything that could potentially be plugged into a smart device. There are many different types of hardware. I referred to eye gaze technology. For somebody who is blind, there's this tool called a refreshable braille display. So it translates anything that's on a computer screen to lines of braille that somebody can read if they have a vision impairment. And then finally, assistive technology includes software. Software can include a variety of different apps for accessibility. There's also word prediction, which is often now built into a lot of our phones and smart devices, but can be used with word processing software as well. And another common form of software that might be used is text to speech. So students that have a hard time decoding text for whatever reason can access that text by having it read aloud through software programs. Augmentative and alternative communication really refers to the wide range of tools and strategies that an individual might use to either supplement or replace verbal speech, particularly when that difficulty with verbal speech is the result of a disability. So we know that in physical disability, there is often impairments that impact the motor skills to communicate expressively, and unfortunately, that can sometimes be misinterpreted as a lack of potential or an inability to express oneself. What we know is that individuals with physical disabilities, including those individuals with significant physical disabilities, have a lot to say. So sometimes they don't have the verbal skills to communicate what they want to say clearly, but we should not misinterpret that as an inability to express oneself or as a lack of potential. So there's a lot of different tools that we can use to help students to express themselves. So AAC refers to the symbols, the strategies, aids or tools, and technology that can be used to enhance communication. It might be something as simple as teaching the students some simple gestures, teaching somebody how to nod for yes or shake their head for no, how to point to identify something that they're talking about or that they want. And it can also be using forms of sign language, so understanding simple signs like more and stop are ways that somebody can make a simple request. Of course, sign language is its own full and complete language, as you'll talk about when you talk about students who are deaf. When we're talking about sign language as a form of AAC for students with physical disabilities, then we need to consider, just like Zach was talking about in his video earlier, that some students might not have the fine motor skills to really clearly express themselves or take full advantage of the language of American Sign Language. For that reason, we have a lot of other tools and devices available from very low tech. So this one here is just a picture communication system, and that might be used to make requests, but and it's a great starting point for a lot of students. But making requests is only really one part of the different things that we might need to communicate. So they might need something that can be expanded a bit more. There are simple devices where you can record your own voice on a device and add a picture, and students can use that. It's called a voice output communication aid. So this one in the middle is an example of that. They're relatively inexpensive and do provide a way for students to, again, express some basic comments, requests, but because you can only have one page open at a time, still can be fairly limiting in terms of what somebody can say. And then we have, there's a wide range of higher tech communication devices like the one here. And some of them a student accesses by touching with their finger, just like on an iPad. And an iPad is another form of a high-tech communication device. Or they can use a technology called eye gaze technology, where the computer camera tracks where their eyes are looking, and they use their eyes just like a mouse on the screen. And then there are other access methods where somebody can use a head pointer or a dot on their forehead that then controls where the mouse goes on the screen also. Generally, these high-tech devices, because they're really computers, have the potential for a much wider range of vocabulary than something that's very low-tech. That also means that there is a lot of teaching involved in order to teach students how to use it. When students use augmented and alternative communication, we want to make sure that we're fully respecting their attempts at communication and their rights to access communication throughout the day. This Communication Bill of Rights was created by a national joint committee of many professionals in a variety of different organizations that support individuals with significant disabilities. And this most recent version included individuals with significant disabilities themselves in the. So I encourage you to kind of look through these rights and think about how we can ensure that we're honoring the ability of our students that we're serving to fully access communication in many different ways. So it's time to take a step back and think outside the box a little bit about this idea of disability. And we've been talking about physical disability, so I'm going to use that as an example. I am really interested in this field of disability studies that is different than the field of special education. Just like ethnic studies or gender studies, disability studies really looks at the whole idea of disability and how it is shaped by culture and by the experiences of people with disabilities themselves. So in the field of disability studies, we know that there are a lot of different ways to kind of think about disability. And I'm going to just talk about two here for a second. So the medical model is a way of looking at disability that's really focused on thinking about disability in terms of the things that somebody can't do. So with somebody with a physical disability, that means that we're kind of focusing on the physical skills or abilities that they really are not their strengths. So if somebody, for example, doesn't walk, right? And within the medical model, then we're focused on addressing those areas of need. So we could think about it in terms of remediation, right? So we're typically focused on kind of fixing or reducing the impact of the disability. In that way, we're kind of saying that because you don't have the same abilities as somebody who's non-disabled, we're going to try to increase your capacity to be more like people who don't have disabilities. That might include physical therapy to work on the ability to have more strength, the ability to stand and move and propel yourself using your feet and your legs. but it's really mostly focused on the things that a student or a child can't do. It's not really related to the environment in general. On the other hand, the social model is more focused on what can the individual do, and works on developing strengths and abilities within that individual. At the same time, the social model is focused on eliminating barriers that might be caused by a mismatch between that individual and their disability and the environments where they participate. So, for example, if somebody uses a wheelchair and an environment is not accessible, they are not disabled by the wheelchair, but they might be disabled by the environment and the fact that they can't access it. Being the same individual and using the same mobility device of a wheelchair, if it's fully accessible and everything has ramps and elevators and or is all on one level, then they are less disabled than they would be in an environment with stairs or bumpy ground where they can't access it. So in the social model, we're really focused on teaching skills in context and helping individuals to participate more broadly within typical environments. In the social model, we're also focused on adjusting the environment and thinking about how we can make things more accessible. And it's really the responsibility of people who can adjust the environment more than the responsibility of the one person with a disability to adjust to the environment. Okay, so that's the medical model and the social model. We're going to look at a quick video to really try to apply these two concepts. So this is Timmy, and he is a young child with spina bifida, and you'll see some of the different ways that his family has addressed some of his needs related to his spina bifida. So we'll look at a couple examples.
Oh, come here. Hey, what's going on? Say Dad.
High fiving, Dad. He's ready to give him the one finger.
Say, hey, Dad.
Where are you going? Good job, Jimmy.
Buddy, you're a professional. How fast you can go. Woohoo!
So here's Timmy's twin sister who does not have a disability, and she's trying out her brother's wheelchair. You can see she's not as good at it. And now Timmy's getting behind. So they have two of these wheelchairs. His sister is in front. Again, she does not have a disability. She can walk on her own, but she's trying out the wheelchair. And Timmy's behind her and is pushing her along around the house. Okay, so if we think about Timmy and the way that his parents approached his disability, they might have focused on his disability or his inability to walk from a medical model. And doing so, they might be focused on different ways that they could, try to get his legs to work. They could work on, is it possible through physical therapy to develop the muscles in his leg or not? And he could be doing that. Instead, they focused on what Timmy can do. So he clearly has a good use of his upper body, and they really see his ability to get around by pushing himself in the custom wheelchair or on his belly as a strength. In fact, compared to his twin sister, he was much more capable than she was when it came to pushing a wheelchair. You also saw some examples of making sure that his environment was accessible. You saw some just that he had nice smooth floors. If he had been in a carpeted house, it would have been much more difficult for him to get around. And because he is just moving around his own home in a way that is similar to how he would if he did not have a disability, he's learning how to push his wheelchair in context, and he's highly motivated to do it because it's fun and it's helping him to access his own environment. So that's kind of an example of the medical model and the social model. When we're thinking about inclusive educational opportunities for students with physical disabilities, then we want to make sure that we're focusing on using their strengths and abilities and making sure that the environment is as accessible as it can be.